New construction options. Building.
Today in Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Command & Conquer, one of the most pivotal strategy games of its time, and one of the first games to set many of the standards seen today in real-time strategy games. Granted, it's not the very first game to set these standards, but the addition of a great soundtrack, superb graphics, and full-motion video cutscenes really helped make this game stand out the way it has. Heck, I even have the box and manuals and everything for this game. And I also like how it says World Domination in a box on the back. The funny thing, though, is that I suck at this game. Yeah, for the most part, I'm not very good at strategy games, especially RTS games. Well, okay, unless it's made by Bullfrog like Populous or Dungeon Keeper, those games I'm great at. But as for CNC and just about every other strategy game out there, I'll do my best to talk about CNC today, but don't expect to see any later moments of the game since I can't even get that far. But I can certainly talk about many of the aspects of the game, so let's dive right in and take a look at the game stats. Command & Conquer was developed by Westwood Studios and originally published by Virgin Interactive in 1995, though Electronic Arts currently holds the rights to the CNC games. It's a 1-to-4 player real-time strategy game featuring MCGA 320x200 256 color graphics and support for multiple sound cards, though it's probably simplest to just select its Sound Blaster 16 support. As for its current release date, the DOS version has always remained commercial, and the prices for it are all over the place, with some people trying to charge as much as $60 for a copy. But really, anything more than $10 is too much. The game was quickly released for Windows though, with SVGA graphics enhancements, and the Windows version of CNC Gold was made freeware in August of 2007 to commemorate the game's 12th anniversary. While there's no longer any direct links to this free download from the Command & Conquer website, the free download itself is still available and can be reached from http://ccgold.ea.com/UK. Be warned though, the game came on 2 CDs and it's a 1.1 gigabyte download, so it might be a little bit of a wait to play it depending on your connection speed. And make sure you follow all of the instructions on the website because the Windows version is a bit temperamental on modern systems. Now, it's difficult to talk about the story for this game because it's presented from 2 different perspectives depending on which side you play as. But what it comes down to is that in an alternate version of 1995, 2 forces are aiming to seize control of the world's resources: the Global Defense Initiative, also known as GDI, and the Brotherhood of Nod. The GDI is a conglomerate of the military forces of various world superpowers joined together to combat terrorism, while the Brotherhood of Nod is apparently an ancient organization that supposedly wants to bring peace and unity to the planet, but is willing to perform any radical actions it takes to achieve this goal, even going so far as to assaulting civilian targets. While it might seem at first that GDI are the good guys and Nod are the bad guys, the game does introduce some ambiguity into this so that it's not that clear-cut. Ultimately, it feels as though GDI and Nod are just 2 rival factions looking to control the Tiberium resources of the world, and the world just happens to be caught in the middle of it all. Which brings us to one of this game's focal points: Tiberium. In the alternate future presented by CNC, this crystalline substance was initially deposited on our planet by a meteorite impact near Tiber River in Italy, and was supposedly first discovered by the Brotherhood of Nod. It is an incredibly prolific substance that soaks up many organic and non-organic substances and rapidly grows into primarily green crystals, which contain a wealth of basic minerals that can easily be utilized with minimal harvesting and processing effort. That's about the only plus side. Tiberium is full of negatives, the first and most obvious of which is that it emits radiation and harmful gases that will mutate any living thing that comes into contact with it, including people, into more Tiberium. This manifests itself in the game as health damage to infantry units that walk unprotected through Tiberium deposits, though vehicles are perfectly fine. The other downside is that it ravages the land around it due to its incredibly prolific and extraterrestrial nature, so if Tiberium were left to grow without being harvested, it would eventually consume every living thing on the planet. I suppose you could say, he who controls the Tiberium controls the world. Anyways, let's talk about the gameplay. Each mission starts you off with a variety of units and puts you in a corner of the map. From there, you have to achieve a particular objective, and sometimes you have to build a base too. To take command of your units, you simply need to treat them like icons on a desktop. You click on a unit to select it. You can hold Shift to click on several units at once. With no units selected, you can click and drag a box around a whole group of them. And then while you have units selected, you can either click where you want them to move, or click on a hostile target to attack it. You can also hold the control key down to force attacking attacking a specific spot, the Alt key to force moving to a particular spot, or both Control and Alt together to defend a particular structure or unit. More importantly though, you can group units together. By holding Control and pressing any number from 0 to 9, you can assign all selected units into a group number, then simply press that number to select all of those units. The only catch is that each unit can only belong to one group at a time. There's also a few other useful keys to keep in mind. Pressing X will cause all selected units to scatter, thus making them less vulnerable to weapons with splash damage, such as grenades. Pressing G will put units into guard mode, meaning if they spot an enemy within a certain range, they'll move in automatically to attack it. S will stop selected units from moving, and I also believe you can use the S key to stop the sale of a structure if you change your mind about selling it, but I've never actually tried this. And yeah, outside of commanding units, you'll frequently have to build a base too. Each base starts out as a mobile construction vehicle, or MCV, which you must move to a certain spot with enough room, then click again to build a construction yard. Arguably the most important building your base can have, since without at least one construction yard, you can't build any structures. Once you've built your construction yard, your sidebar shows up. And this bar is used primarily to issue build orders for structures and units, but can also be used as a map monitor once you have a communication center built. As you build various structures, more build options become available depending on the technology available to you. As you get further in the game, the tech level advances and more interesting things can be built. One thing to always keep in mind though when building structures is your power consumption. The vertical bar on the far left of the sidebar is your power gauge. The colored part shows you how much power is available, and a mark on the bar indicates actual power usage from all of your structures. Normally the colored bar is green, but if power usage gets too close to the top, you'll start to have brownouts and the green bar will turn yellow. This will deactivate your radar and turrets and will slow down build orders by 50%. If you try to use way too much power though, you'll have a complete blackout. The yellow bar will turn red, and build orders will take nearly 10 times longer to finish. If this ever happens, it's best to just sell some structures until the power level once again becomes manageable, then build another power plant before getting the structures you sold back into place. Now, while the game mostly centers around building bases, controlling groups of units, and annihilating all enemy forces, some missions are a bit more unusual. One particular GDI mission has you taking command of a sole commando unit. Your task? Infiltrate an enemy base and take out their something. You're not privy to that particular piece of information thanks to radio interference. The commando unit is special in that it can easily dispatch any other kind of infantry unit from long range, can destroy any building in an instant by planting explosive charges on it, but is completely ineffective against vehicles or turrets. There's other special units too. The engineer, for example, is expensive and worthless in combat, but all an engineer has to do is touch an enemy building and they're able to take command of it, converting it into your own building. This can be devastating in multiplayer, because if you're ready to build something like an obelisk of light, you can take over an enemy building with an engineer, then immediately place the obelisk right next to the captured building and just incinerate any enemies still inside the base. Of course, in multiplayer, most players will see the engineers en route with enough time on hand to sell the building that's about to be taken over. Yeah, I have indeed played this game multiplayer quite a number of times, but that was a long time ago, so I don't have any footage of such gameplay. Besides, I lost virtually 90% of all my multiplayer CNC matches. Playing the game again after so many years though, I've noticed a few interesting things this time around. One key thing I've noticed is that stationary units are far more effective in combat than moving units, because many units, primarily infantry, can't fire while moving. And a stationary unit with the same firing range as a moving unit can always fire at the moving unit before the moving unit can fire back, giving the stationary unit the advantage. Thus, by creating skirmishing lines and very slowly advancing them, you can do some serious damage. This tactic though will fail if you start getting attacked primarily by units with longer attack ranges than your own units, or if your units are not varied enough to take out anything they're up against. This leads into a very important distinction in the game's weapons. Weapons come in 4 basic flavors: small guns, big guns, explosives, and specials. Well, at least that's the way I like to classify them. Small guns instantly go from point A to point B and have the highest accuracy of all weapons. The only catch is they do very little damage, so they're best used against infantry. The GDI Humvee and the Nod Buggy are very effective against most forms of infantry because they have small guns, but they also have extended range. Big guns are the kind fired by most tanks, and they are absolutely terrible at hitting infantry, but extremely accurate and powerful against vehicles and other buildings. Explosive weapons come in many forms, and each unit with an explosive weapon will have to be treated differently to get the most out of them. Though one thing you can be sure of is that if you destroy a unit carrying an explosive weapon, they may go out with a bang and damage nearby units, hostile or friendly. Explosive weapons are also extremely dangerous to use at close range, so they take a lot of effort to effectively use. Special weapons, on the other hand, are the unique ones. Nod units, for instance, get access to a flamethrower tank and flamethrower infantry, the flames of which do lots of damage and have a huge range effect. The drawback, though, is that they can easily hurt their own friendly units. Another unique weapon, which I wish I had the gameplay footage of, but don't, is the laser fired by the Obelisk of Light. It has an incredibly slow rate of fire, but it will basically incinerate any unarmored units, and will only take 2 or 3 shots to take out even the most powerful units in the game. You also can gain access to flying units and attack orders. Flying units require special landing pads and have limited ammunition, so when you tell one to attack a target, they have to return afterwards to resupply their ammo. You can't select flying units with the mouse while they're in the air though, so be sure to group them so you can have them attack multiple targets if they have the ammo for it. Attack orders appear in the build list for units, and they require a fairly lengthy period of time to become accessible, but once they're ready, you can use them to devastate a small portion of the enemy. As far as I know, there's 3 different kinds of attack orders you can gain access to. Firstly, there's airstrikes, which are special to the GDI single-player campaign, though a lucky find from a crate in multiplayer can give them to you as well. When you select the target for an airstrike, moments later an A-10 plane will fly overhead and pummel your target area with explosives. Late in the game, GDI gains access to the ion cannon, which does incredible amounts of damage, but only to a single target. As for the Brotherhood of Nod, the right set of circumstances gives them access to nuclear missiles, which cause massive amounts of damage over a broad target area, though less damage per target than the GDI's ion cannon. Although I'm not too great at this game, I do have a few generic tips for people who want to try this game out and aren't really skilled at RTS games to begin with. My first tip is that quantity in this game is more effective than quality. Many of the weapons fired by the various units are fairly equivalent in power, and the more expensive units, while they do have better weapons, they're not better enough to justify the huge increase in cost versus several less costly units. This doesn't mean you shouldn't buy expensive units, but don't build expensive units until you have the resources to build more than just a couple of them. Secondly, don't assault stationary enemies with similar firing ranges because, as I mentioned earlier, stationary targets with equal or greater firing range always have the advantage. Instead, assault such enemies with units that have a greater firing range, or lure such units into your own firing range. Another trick is to send in one expendable unit, and then, while the enemy is focused on that unit, send in your assault force so they can get into position while they're being ignored. Thirdly, it's almost never a good idea to group all of your units together. Always keep a couple or 3 groups with different objectives and placements. This way you can respond to attacks more easily or launch attacks without leaving yourself too vulnerable. Granted, it can take a while to build up multiple groups. Try to find out where the enemy is attacking you from, and set up your attack groups to defend those spots on the map. Build them up, and then, when they're ready, send them on the offensive. Fourthly, build an extra harvester as soon as you can. It's very unlikely you'll be attacked heavy early in a mission, so getting multiple harvesters going will help you build up your credits much faster. Heck, if you can't build a second harvester, just build a second Tiberium refinery, since each refinery comes with one. If you can't afford the power drain from a second refinery, just get one ready to build, sell your current refinery, and immediately build a new one in its place. Having multiple unit creating structures like barracks or airstrips can also help because the more of them you have, the faster you can build units. But it's not as critical since ideally, you should be building stuff constantly. Fifthly, if you're playing single player, try to rack up as many credits as you can before ending a mission, because you sometimes get to carry some of that money over to the next mission, which means the more you can amass in one mission, the more you can start with in the next. Lastly, your attack orders such as the nukes and ion cannon are best used to surprise the enemy during an assault, especially in multiplayer. You should time your strongest advances and attacks to coincide with when your attack orders will be ready to execute, though always keep your opponents on their toes with frequent minor attacks so that they spend more effort building their defenses rather than attacking you. Because, let's face it, if you don't take the offensive in any RTS game, you're going to ultimately lose. So, that's Command & Conquer, one of the best real-time strategy games ever created and worth a play at least once, even if you don't like strategy games. It's also really simple to set up in DOSBox. All you gotta do is set the cycles count to max, and there you go. Granted, since the game came on 2 CDs, you'll either need to have one loaded when you play, or create ISOs and image mount them. However, CNC can only detect 1 CD at a time, so if you do image mount them, you may want to do what I did and have 2 separate shortcuts and config files, one to run the GDI disk, and one to run the Nod disk. Anyways, that's all for the 40th episode of Ancient DOS Games. I hope all of you have been watching and been spreading the word, because it's thanks to your support that I've been able to get ADG as far as I have. Next Saturday is a filler episode, so make sure you send in your suggestions for what you want to see, and stay tuned to also catch the hint for episode 41.
Battle control terminated.